I think we are at a watershed, as Sue Barelowitz was saying this morning, and I think there are huge opportunities, I think, at the moment in terms of really driving forward in relation to the prevention of child sexual abuse and exploitation. An awful lot more work to do, an awful lot more coordination and conversation and action to take, but I think we are at a watershed. And there are a number of green shoots, I think, around in relation to prevention of child sexual abuse, both here in the UK, but internationally as well. I know in North America, in Australia and New Zealand, and elsewhere as well, obviously, and no doubt the Eradicating Child Sexual Abuse project is going to highlight some excellent practice right around the world. Child sexual abuse is a public health problem right across the world, globally, and I think we've got huge opportunity here to get some real international momentum going. Here in the UK, we've got some excellent work being undertaken by, of course, Stop It Now and the Lucy Faithfull Foundation, by Circles of Support and Accountability. The NSPCC Underwear Rule campaign, I think, has been successful in helping parents have that conversation with their children about keeping themselves safe. And then some really good work being planned by NOTA, the National Organisation of the Treatment of Abusers, as well, in terms of getting a prevention forum up and running. At the NSPCC, our service delivery, our policy development and our research is very much focused in relation to sexual abuse and sexual exploitation, about the treatment of it and the prevention of it as well. And our focus is very much on generating learning from our service delivery, our policy development and our research activity, and ensuring that learning is able to gain and provide as much leverage as possible. David Finkelhor gets another mention now as well, and he's coming over actually. We've got him coming over in February next year, and further information to follow in relation to a conference, but that will be maybe something for your diaries. But as well as his preconditions to offend, and that's the significance of that work. Of course, it was David's work with Angela Brown 26 years ago now, in 1988, that began to give us more of a comprehensive understanding in relation to the impacts of child sexual abuse. The often acute feelings of powerlessness, betrayal, stigmatisation, and what they term traumatic sexualisation as well, that impacts children and young people when they've been sexually abused, and the way in which the legacy of that can perpetuate into adulthood. And of course, we've seen that writ large over recent weeks and months, certainly with calls to our helpline in the wake of the historic abuse that has come to light, but also, of course, as a result of the continuing child sexual abuse that's being perpetrated against children and young people, and that being highlighted clearly as a result of calls to Childline. And this piece of work that we're going to talk about this morning really was an attempt to begin to think about the economic costs of those impacts that David Finkelhor and Angela Brown talked about so eloquently back in 1988. What are the economic costs of child sexual abuse? At the end of the day, money does talk. And certainly in terms of conversations with government, it talks. There are significant potential savings to be had through prevention activity, and this research, the first of its kind in the UK, we think probably the first internationally, is a start, and we want to emphasise that. It's very much a start to begin to have that look at what the economic costs are of child sexual abuse. We've been very cautious and conservative in our calculations, and we would encourage colleagues to consider these findings, to reflect on them, and we would hope that they're very much there as a start of ongoing discourse and dialogue, really, in relation to the economic costs of child sexual abuse. They are indeed significant. A final comment before I hand over to Aliya, just in relation to taking all this forward. Of course, government and the role of government is absolutely key, and government coordinating and joining up is absolutely key. There are some opportunities now with the Home Office's work as well, and I think some opportunities now potentially with the Department of Education, with some changes there this morning in the new Secretary of State for Education, and let's hope there that they begin to grasp the nettle in relation to some of the prevention initiatives that Donald was talking about and the crucial role that schools have as well. I'd like to hand over now to Aliya, who's going to talk us through in some more detail in relation to this work that we've been doing on the economic costs. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Slides, apologies.
That's okay. I think John's covered the first couple of slides. And do please give me a 5-minute warning because I've forgotten my watch today. So I just wanted to stress that this analysis, as John was saying, I'm not going to give you one number of how much does child sexual abuse cost. There's a lot of uncertainty about so many aspects of this research, and we're very interested in hearing people's improvements once they've had time to digest the report. We're expecting copies to be couriered at some point this morning, so do grab a copy and take it away and get back in touch with us. So, and on this I just want to say, I had a little bit of a debate with Mr. Finkelhall, Professor Finkelhall, who's been mentioned a lot today, and he was saying we don't want to detract from the moral case of dealing with child sexual abuse, and this economic analysis is not meant to do that at all. It's meant to complement it in a language that policymakers understand. Okay, so before we decided on how we would measure the costs of child sexual abuse, we had a look at what academic evidence was out there and how other people had done it. And then we found that while no one's measured child sexual abuse in itself, there have been a couple of pieces of work looking at overall child maltreatment. None in the UK, as you can see, they've been done in the USA and Australia. And while there's a lot of differences in how each report has tackled the detail of the costs, each case, authors calculated the costs of a number of key impacts of child abuse. And there's categories there that won't surprise people in this audience: health, law enforcement, and criminal justice, and welfare or children's social care. So based on the literature, we came up with our own methodology, applying the approaches that the other papers have done, but to a child sexual abuse specific context and a UK context as well. And I should say we're measuring here the annual costs of child sexual abuse in 2012. So that's the cost for all current and former victims are experiencing in that 1 year. And of course, costs will be incurred in all the years around that. And there's basically a 3-step approach. Step 1 is to work out what the key impacts of child sexual abuse are and how big those impacts are. So, for example, an adult former victim of child sexual abuse, how much more likely would they be to suffer from depression, for example? The second step is to work out how many people are affected by each impact, which requires making assumptions about how many adult and child victims there are. And the third is to get information about the costs of each impact based on service use for 1 year. How much does it cost to treat an adult with depression in the UK in 2012? It sounds easy, but it wasn't that straightforward. Okay, so I'm not going to read out the list of impacts that we've included finally. You can read through them all. I just want to stress that we know that not all victims experience all of these impacts, and we know that some victims are going to be experiencing impacts that are not on this list. This exercise is not about measuring the impacts on any individuals. We've had to think about averages here and make pragmatic decisions about what to include based on quality academic evidence and where we could get good enough cost information. Just to stress that John was saying we've been cautious and conservative in our costs, and I'm going to say those words a lot throughout my remaining bit of time. But just to point out that on our services for children impacts, we've included NSPCC service costs for providing treatment services for sexual abuse. We know there's many other organisations who do this work, and if we had their cost information, we'd add that into the costs and make it bigger. Okay, so just to give you a bit of a flavour about the impacts. Here are the mental health impacts we included in the report. So just to pull out adult depression, which is the fourth row, we've assumed that adult victims of child sexual abuse are twice as likely to suffer from depression than those who haven't. And the relevant academic evidence that we've made the assumptions on are included. In the report, there's a table showing all the assumptions for every single impact that we've included in the report. We're trying to be very transparent in what we're doing. And I just want to stress here, we're being conservative again. I can't remember things off the top of my head from these two papers, but for example, if one paper found that adult victims were 3 times more likely and another found 2.8 times more likely to suffer from depression, we would take 2. So we've been very conservative in our measures of impacts that we've used. So that was step 1, was what are the impacts and how big are they? Step 2 was how many people are being affected. So we need to know the number of victims, both current and former, of child sexual abuse. Now, obviously, there's huge uncertainty here. We know that we don't know this information. So we use the NSPCC commission study by Radford and colleagues that you might be familiar with, published in 2011. Now, one big difference is the Radford report published percentages of people who'd reported as victims of sexual abuse. And we've converted these percentages into numbers based on the UK population in 2012. Now, because of the massive amount of uncertainty here, and also because one of the prevalence figures for adults was on the large side, when you look at other prevalence figures that have been published, you see 24% of 18 to 24-year-olds reported ever being a victim. We decided to do a range of figures and have a low number of victims in a year as well, which is the final column there. So we're very aware of the uncertainty, and that's why we're producing ranges, is the point here. I'm not going to say too much about costs, just to really thank everybody at the PSSRU and the Social Research Unit who spent so much time getting up-to-date, good quality cost information. They're wonderful. Okay. So before I get to the results, I'm just going to quickly go through what costs we've specifically included. So for the child mental health costs, I just want to stress that this is just the cost from treating depression CAMS mostly. It does not include any inpatient costs for children. So conservative. These slides should be called "Our estimate is conservative." Please take that away with you. For the child suicide and self-harm costs, this will be most relevant self-harm costs, we exclude any follow-up mental health treatment. The adult depression and PTSD costs are based on typical service use which we got from survey information, it's counselling, GPs, and in and outpatient information. And the drug and alcohol costs for alcohol, they're the physical health costs only. They exclude all mental health costs associated with alcohol and drug abuse, and that's because we wanted to avoid double counting mental health from sexual abuse and mental health from drug and alcohol. So it's very conservative. Criminal justice system. Donald showed the flow through the criminal justice system in one of his slides earlier, and we've captured the costs of all of that flow from police to courts to the penal system, prison and suspended sentences. And our children's social care costs are very, very narrow, and what I do want to say about them is that they are only looking at cases of sexual abuse only. So cases with multiple forms of abuse where one of those forms is sexual abuse have not been included. And finally, before you get to what the actual costs are, the lost productivity costs, these are really important. You'll see in the results they account for by far the majority of the total costs. And what they are basically is they're capturing the fact that adult victims, according to some evidence, are less likely to be in work and more likely to be in lower paid work, and they're capturing the costs of that to the victims. Thank you. So, these are the final results that are in the report, and there's quite a lot of information here. Just let me draw your eye to the bottom row. Overall, we found that the costs of child sexual abuse in the UK in 2012 were between 1.6 and 3.2 billion pounds. It's a very large range, but the point is they're very large. You know, we can't be certain about exactly what they are, but we can be certain they're massive. If you look to the darker green rows in the table, they're the totals of each of the impacts, and then you can see that, you know, well over 80% of the costs are coming from this lost productivity, these people less likely to be in work and more likely to be in lower paid work. And that unfortunately but unsurprisingly means that the bulk of the costs are falling on the victims. Thinking about the cost to the state, that's going to be coming from health, the criminal justice system and children's social care. They're between 200 and 430 million pounds a year. And as I said, while that sounds a lot less than the overall 1 to 3 billion, that is still a significant cost that is probably going to be incurred in all years, really. And finally, I just want to say that this is not including any costs of pain and suffering that other people have included. I don't know if you've seen Walby's report on the cost of domestic violence, where the costs of pain and suffering accounted for, you know, they were absolutely huge. We do try and estimate them in the report, but the assumptions we use are really strong. The point is they'd be a lot higher if we did include those costs. So John, I don't know if you want to say a little conclusion.
Thank you, Aliya. Thank you. So just to conclude then, and to wrap up this brief presentation, this is very much a first attempt to get, I think, a reasonably accurate and evidence-informed view of the economic costs of child sexual abuse in the UK. It is a start. We would certainly encourage colleagues out there to examine this, to offer us suggestions in terms of how these estimates can be further refined and further developed. But I think at the end of the day, we're looking at huge numbers, huge costs, and I think we can speak with a degree of confidence to government now about the economic legacy, if you like, of child sexual abuse currently in the UK, and what that means to obviously individuals in terms of emotional cost, of course, and that's we mustn't forget that, but also to the UK economy, I think, in terms of those costs to individuals and costs in terms of lost productivity. And I think it underlines the fact that we are looking at and talking about a public health problem as far as sexual abuse is concerned. And I think, just going back to what I was saying in my introductory comments, because there are now those opportunities there, I think, in terms of taking forward the dialogue about prevention in relation to child sexual abuse, these numbers and this work will, I think, add a further platform and a further evidence-informed argument as to why we should be treating child sexual abuse as a public health problem, and what can be saved in economic terms if we can intervene and stop the abuse before it occurs in the first place. Thank you very much.